The word woke has gained traction in the last several years. It was popularized by Childish Gambino in the 2016 song Redbone, but began surging in the Fox News ecosystem in early 2021. The word itself, whose origins are rooted in African American vernacular, describes an awareness of social and political issues like structural racism. Will Brown, Jacksonville Today reporter, has been digging into the political evolution of the word, and he joins us now. Welcome, Will.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. So, Will, your Jax Today article published last night. I know you've been working on this story for a while. What got you started on it?
Sadly, the shooting in Jacksonville in the Grand Park neighborhood in August 26th. A number of people in the aftermath of that shooting were saying that the word woke and the language surrounding it and the way in which it was used by certain politicians contributed to a climate where someone felt emboldened to go to a store and fire at black people. And so instead of just letting them say what they said at face value, went and looked and listened to multiple perspectives of black people, politicians themselves, political leaders, academics who study language, and wanted to see what they had to say.
You dug into the origins of the word woke. What did you learn?
Well, Dr. Meredith Clark, who's the director of the Center for Communication, Media Innovation, and Social Change at Northeastern, really broke it down and said it really started being used in the early 30s when the Scottsboro Boys, a group of men, or young men, excuse me, they were not all men, but teenagers mostly, who were in Alabama traveling by train up to Memphis to look for work. And a white woman falsely accused them of rape. And combined, the 9 young men spent 130 years in jail for a crime they did not commit. And so the term "stay woke" was used to encourage people to pay attention to their surroundings.
So, woke is now both a political buzzword and kind of a label for certain types of educational programs that have been targeted by Florida politicians led by Governor Ron DeSantis. Is woke the same thing as DEI, like diversity, equity, and inclusion?
When I spoke with Dr. Clark, she didn't think so, but she did think that intellectualism is under assault in Florida, and that academics, not just in the country but throughout the world, are really paying attention to what's taking place in Florida to see how our discussion of language and the way that we use words and any potential ramifications or positives of those words and how that the impact of those.
No, and you spoke to her. She talked to you a little bit about the word as a euphemism for some politicians. Let's hear a little of your interview with Professor Clark and what she had to say about that.
The idea of recoding woke is grounded in this practice of language abstraction. So it's saying without saying, in the same way that when we talk about the inner city, we're talking about communities that are primarily populated by black and brown people, or when we talk about at-risk kids, we are often talking about poor children, black children, brown children, children for whom English is not their first language. The recoding of woke follows the same sort of pattern. Rather than saying, explicitly, I'm talking about being anti-black, it's easier to say that I'm talking about wokeness, and that wokeness being something that is considered deviant or bad for the powerful, the dominant culture.
And so she's talking about that evolution, coded language. Is that the kind of thing that you were hearing in the aftermath of the shooting that got you interested in this story?
Yes, a number of pastors, civil rights leaders, educators, lay people, business people. Some would say these things on the record. Some would say these things off the record. Some would say these things to me in a very personal capacity of, Will, for real? Like, is this what's happening? And so when I had chances to ask leaders on both sides of the aisle their perspective on things, I would take the questions and what people were saying to me, and I would ask them directly. I had a chance to speak with Representative Sam Garrison, who is from Northeast Florida. He's in line to be the Speaker of the House, and he says he does not believe anti-woke is a euphemism for anti-black. But I had the chance to ask him that question because that was people were asking me, so I was essentially taking what people were saying to me and asking it to people, to leaders, and to people who are in positions of power, authority, or prestige.
And so Garrison actually represents the district where the gunman in the Dollar General mass shooting lived. You asked him for a definition of woke, and I don't think he was able to give you one. What did he tell you?
He went back to, I think it was the famous Supreme Court phrase, I know it when I see it. I think it was to describe obscenity. And, Representative Garrison and I had a long conversation. And, to be extraordinarily clear, anytime anything related to the shooter came up, he forcefully denounced and said, this is not something I support. This is not something, he denounced him in every way that someone with his large vocabulary could. And so there wasn't any couching of, he thoroughly denounced everything that the young man who went into the Dollar General stood for and everything he learned. And one thing Representative Garrison did say was, the ability to actually have debates and topics of things in person will probably lead to a ramping down of the rhetoric, because if you look someone in the eye, you'll respect them a little more than just popping off on a keyboard.
That's right. And he said he emphatically does not believe that anti-woke is a euphemism for anti-black. But he did talk to you about that. Let's hear a little bit of what he had to say directly.
It's easier to blame politicians. But the reality of it is, what are we doing as a society and a culture that allows this sort of stuff to exist? And it treads on difficult territory. It treads on First Amendment issues, freedom of speech, government, censorship, regulation, all that sort of stuff. It's complicated. Political rhetoric is not the result, is not what's triggering this.
Obviously, there's debate in the community about what role political rhetoric plays in inciting or contributing to an atmosphere of intolerance or even violence. Garrison cited mental illness and, quote, the dark corners of the internet as being responsible for the mass shooting. And he specifically said this wasn't about Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, which I think are the names that are most associated with anti-woke rhetoric.
And to be fair, he also mentioned this had nothing to do with Joe Biden. And I think that was one of the things that one of the pastors that I spoke with for this story said, because the pastor, Benjamin Dixon, who lives in Northwest Jacksonville, has been to that Dollar General many a times with his family, with his young child, has family members who attend Edward Waters. So this was a very visceral thing for him, because he realizes that could have been any of us. He compared what happened in August to what took place at Mother Emanuel in 2015 and what took place at the Tops grocery store in 2022, because young white men were coming from other areas into black enclaves, whether it's grocery stores, churches, convenience stores, and shooting and killing people. And the difference here
because of their color, because of their race.
Yes, and the difference here is the shooter here died by suicide, whereas the other two specifically have said that they were they learned some of their racial animus through online readings, through chat rooms, through really they learned some of their rhetoric through just being online in the dark corners of the internet, like Representative Garrison mentioned.
And we do know a little bit about this shooter in this case. Also, it appeared to be fairly isolated. His father said spent a lot of time on his computer, and we've learned that he left a racist manifesto behind that has not yet been released by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Is still looking into the shooting, but that issue certainly was at the fore when our governor came to town in the wake of the shooting. Was booed by some residents who appeared to take umbrage at the fact that he was even there, given what they see as his animosity towards issues of diversity. But DeSantis himself really forcefully pushed back on that idea that either him or his policies had anything to do with the racist murders. We have some sound from him at a Jacksonville appearance when he was asked about that just a few days after the killings. Let's hear a little bit of that.
No, You don't get to come here and blame me for some madman. That is not appropriate, and I'm not going to accept it.
So that was a very heated exchange he had with a member of the audience who had asked that question. What was the mood in that room? You were there that day.
It resembled more of a pep rally than a press conference. There were about 100 people. I would say 99.8% of them were supporters of the governor. And politicians will have supporters, so that is what it is. But when the gentleman asked this question, it was kind of a bit bait and switch of sorts, because he said, "Well, I'm a military veteran, and you're a military veteran too." And then, well, let me ask you about this. And as he was booed as he asked the question, removed from the restaurant, told to stand outside, and then things went back to business as usual. And about 85% of that discussion was about the governor's not being in agreement with the COVID-19 policies of he specifically said the past two administrations. So he wasn't just thumbing the needle at President Joe Biden. He was also thumbing the needle at former President Donald Trump for his COVID response. So that was what most of it was about. But that was the first time he took questions in Jacksonville in the aftermath of the shootings. And that was at a time where none of the three families had buried their loved ones. I mean, I think it was on a Thursday. And then 24 hours later were the first two of the three funerals.
Right.
And some of the pastors inside those funerals made it abundantly clear that they thought that some of the things that the governor championed, the governor specifically, not all Republicans, but the governor specifically championed, led to people having to be inside of a church funeralizing somebody who the casket had to be closed.
The signature act, perhaps, of this governor is what's called the Stop Woke Act. Can you just remind us a little bit about what that law provides? I think there's a line in there that I wanted to actually ask you more specifically about, that schools cannot make students feel guilt or anguish or other forms of psychological distress when teaching issues related, for instance, to history.
And to be fair, Representative Garrison did mention that he can't force people how to think. But I remember in fourth grade learning about the Ernest Green story, and I felt horrible. But sometimes it was all facts. So sometimes history is not pleasant.
Will Brown, thank you so much for your article and for joining us today.